I never thought I would find myself telling this story, but sometimes the pain inside you becomes too heavy to carry alone. My name is Margaret, and for more than 30 years, I was a devoted wife and mother. My husband, David, and I built a life together filled with laughter, struggles, and the kind of love that weathers every storm. Our son Ethan was the light of our lives, the bond that made our family feel unbreakable. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. When David fell ill, our world shifted overnight. The man who had always been my rock was suddenly fragile, fighting for every breath in a sterile hospital room. I spent my days at his bedside, holding his hand, whispering words of comfort, and praying for a miracle. The pain of watching someone you love slip away is indescribable, but I clung to the hope that our family would get through it together. Have you ever felt your world crumble in a single moment? I thought the worst was behind me, that nothing could hurt more than losing the man I loved. But I was wrong. What happened next made me question everything I believed about love and family. If you've ever faced betrayal when you needed support the most, you'll understand my pain. This is the story of how, in my darkest hour, the people I trusted most shattered my heart in ways I never could have imagined. The day that changed everything began like so many others in recent weeks, cold, sterile, and heavy with dread. The hospital room was filled with the low hum of machines and the faint scent of antiseptic. I sat by David's bedside, clutching his hand, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. Every breath felt like a small victory, but also a reminder of how fragile life had become. Family members came and went, offering quiet words of comfort and awkward hugs. Some sat in the corner, whispering prayers. Others busied themselves with coffee runs and phone calls, trying to keep the fear at bay. I tried to stay strong for everyone, but inside I was unraveling. That it was late afternoon when Ethan arrived. I noticed immediately that something was off. He walked in briskly, his eyes darting around the room, avoiding my gaze. He clutched a thick envelope in his hand. The edges crumpled as if he'd been gripping it too tightly for too long. My heart skipped a beat. In that moment, I told myself it was just stress after all. We were all on edge, but a mother knows when something is wrong. He barely glanced at his father before sitting down beside me. "Mom, can we talk for a minute?" he asked, his voice low and tense. I nodded, my stomach twisting with anxiety. We stepped out into the hallway, away from the beeping monitors and the watchful eyes of our relatives. Ethan handed me the envelope, his hands shaking. "What's this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He hesitated, looking everywhere but at me. "Just read it, Mom. It's important." I stared at the envelope, my mind racing. Why now? Why here? I could feel the weight of the paper in my hands, heavier than it should have been. I glanced up at Ethan, searching his face for answers, but he only looked away. "Why do you have those papers, son?" I pressed, my voice barely above a whisper. He swallowed hard. "It's what Dad wanted. He asked me to bring them." A chill ran through me. I tore open the envelope, my hands trembling. Inside were several documental gold papers, covered in dense, official language. My eyes scanned the pages, trying to make sense of the words. And then I saw it, a signature, my husband's, at the bottom of a page that would change everything. I felt the blood drain from my face. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I looked up at Ethan, desperate for an explanation, but he just stood there, silent and ashamed. I never imagined my darkest moment would get even worse. The pain of watching my husband slip away was already more than I thought I could bear. But now, standing in that hospital hallway, holding those papers, I felt a new kind of heartbreak of betrayal, so deep it left me gasping for air. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to tear the papers to shreds, but all I could do was stand there, frozen, as the world I thought I knew crumbled around me. I stood in that hospital hallway, the world spinning around me as I tried to make sense of the words on the page. My hands trembled so badly I could barely hold the papers. I read them once, twice, 3 times, hoping I had misunderstood. But the truth was there in black and white: me husband's signature, my son's involvement, and a decision that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. Shock was the first thing I felt. It was like a cold wave crashing over me, numbing my senses. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just stared at the paper, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. How could this be happening? How could the man I had loved for so many years, the father of my child, do this to me now, when I was already losing him? I looked up at Ethan, searching his face for any sign of regret, any hint that this was some terrible mistake. But he wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stood there, silent and tense, his jaw clenched. I wanted to reach out to him, to shake him, to demand an explanation. Instead, my voice came out as a broken whisper. How could you do this to me now, of all times? He flinched, but said nothing. The silence between us was heavy, filled with all the things we couldn't say. As I stood there, memories flooded my mind. Happier times, when our family was whole. I remembered the day Ethan was born, the way David had held him in his arms, tears of joy streaming down his face. I remembered birthday parties, family vacations, quiet evenings at home. I remembered laughter, love, and the feeling that we could weather any storm as long as we were together. Was I really so unworthy in my own family's eyes? Had I done something to deserve this? I replayed every argument, every harsh word, every moment of doubt. I wondered if I had missed the signs, if I had been blind to the cracks forming beneath the surface of our lives. I tried to steady myself, to keep my composure as I walked back into the hospital room. The last thing I wanted was to cause a scene, to let the rest of the family see how broken I felt. I sat by David's bedside, the papers hidden in my lap, and forced a smile for the relatives who came and went. But inside, I was falling apart. Every time I looked at David, I saw the man I had loved for so long and the stranger who had betrayed me. I wanted to ask him why, to demand answers, but he was too weak to speak, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. I wondered if he even knew what he had done, if he understood the pain he had caused. Ethan hovered nearby, avoiding my gaze. I could see the guilt in his posture, the way he kept his distance. I wanted to reach out to him, to pull him close and beg him to tell me this wasn't real. But I couldn't. The hurt was too raw, the betrayal too deep. As the hours passed, I felt myself slipping into a kind of numbness. I went through the motions and swung questions from doctors, comforting relatives, making sure everyone had what they needed. But inside, I was screaming. I wanted to run, to hide, to disappear. I wanted to wake up and find that this was all just a terrible nightmare. I found myself replaying every moment of my marriage, searching for clues. Had David always planned this? Had Ethan been in on it from the start? Or was this some desperate decision made in the face of death? I didn't know what hurt more at the betrayal itself, or the realization that I might never know the truth. That night, after everyone else had gone home, I sat alone in the hospital room, the papers clutched in my hands. I stared at David, his face pale and drawn, and wondered if he would ever wake up, if I would ever get the chance to ask him why. I wondered if I would ever be able to forgive him or myself. To anyone watching this, I have to ask, what would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have confronted your son? Would you have torn up the papers and walked away? Or would you have done what I did, sat in silence, holding your pain close, afraid to let the world see how deeply you'd been wounded? I don't know if I made the right choice. All I know is that in that moment, I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that this wasn't the end, that somehow, I would find the strength to face whatever came next, even if I had to do it alone. The hours after reading those papers felt like a blur. I moved through the hospital in a daze, my mind racing with questions and fears. I kept glancing at Ethan, hoping he would offer some explanation, some comfort, but he avoided my eyes every time. The weight of the betrayal pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. I knew I couldn't let this go. I needed answers. I waited until the hallway was empty, then found Ethan sitting alone in the family waiting room, staring blankly at the wall. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for a conversation I never imagined I'd have with my own son. "Ethan," I said quietly, my voice trembling, "I need you to tell me the truth. What is this? Why now? Why would your father do this to me?" He didn't look at me. He just shrugged, his jaw tight. "Mom, this is what Dad wanted." I felt a surge of anger rise up, hot and sharp. "How can you say that? Your father and I have been together for over 30 years. We built this family together. Why would he do something like this behind my back?" Ethan finally turned to me, his eyes cold and distant. "He said he wanted to make sure everything was taken care of. He didn't want you to have to worry about anything after he was gone." I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. Taken care of, by cutting me out, by handing me these papers while he's lying in that bed, barely alive. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "It's not like that, Mom. You're overreacting." I stared at him, my heart pounding. "Overreacting? Ethan, do you even know what's in these papers? Do you understand what this means for me, for our family?" He looked away again, silent. I could feel the distance between us growing with every word. I wanted to reach out, to shake him, to make him see how much this was hurting me, but I knew it wouldn't matter. He had already made up his mind. I opened the envelope again, my hands shaking. I forced myself to read every word, to understand exactly what David and Ethan had done. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. It was a new will, one that left almost everything to Ethan. The house, the savings, even the small things that held so much meaning for me. There was a clause that allowed me to stay in the house for a reasonable period. But it was clear that I was no longer the center of this family. I was an afterthought, a burden to be managed. Tears stung my eyes as I looked up at Ethan. "Did you know about this? Did you help him do this to me?" He hesitated, then nodded. "He asked me to help. He said it was for the best." I felt my knees buckle, and I sank into a chair, the papers clutched in my lap. "For the best? For who?" "Ethan, for you." He didn't answer. The silence between us was deafening. As the days passed, the tension in the hospital grew. Word of the new will spread through the family, and suddenly everyone seemed to have an opinion. My sister-in-law Carol pulled me aside one afternoon, her voice low and urgent. "Margaret, I heard about the will. I'm so sorry. I had no idea David was planning this." I shook my head, tears threatening to spill over. "Neither did I. I feel like I don't even know my own family anymore." Carol squeezed my hand. "If you need anything, I'm here. But maybe it's best not to make a scene. David's so sick. The last thing we need is more drama." Her words stung, but I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I could see the way the rest of the family looked at Mazome with pity, others with suspicion. A few avoided me altogether, as if my pain was contagious. I tried to talk to Ethan again, to make him see reason, but he was always busy, always surrounded by other relatives. When I finally cornered him in the hallway, he was curt and dismissive. "Mom, I don't want to talk about this anymore. It's done. Dad made his decision." I felt my anger flare. "And what about me, Ethan? What about everything I've done for this family? Do I just disappear now?" He looked at me, his expression hard. "You're not disappearing. You'll be fine. Dad just wanted to make sure things were simple." Simple. The word echoed in my mind, mocking me. Nothing about this was simple. I was losing my husband, my home, my sense of belonging all at once. Other family members began to take sides. Some, like Carol, offered quiet support, but most stayed out of it, not wanting to get involved. A few whispered behind my back, speculating about what I must have done to deserve this. I felt more alone than ever. One evening, As I sat by David's bedside, I tried to talk to him about the will. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret, but he was too weak to speak, his words lost in the haze of pain and medication. I held his hand, tears streaming down my face. "Why, David, why would you do this to me?" He squeezed my hand weakly, but said nothing. I was left with my questions, my grief, and a growing sense of betrayal. The days blurred together, each one harder than the last. I started to withdraw, avoiding family gatherings and conversations. I felt like a ghost in my own life, invisible and unwanted. But what he said next made everything worse. One afternoon, as I sat alone in the hospital cafeteria, Ethan approached me. He slid into the seat across from me, his face set in a grim line. "Mom, I need you to understand something," he said quietly. "Dad didn't do this to hurt you. He just wanted to make sure I was taken care of. He was worried about the future, about what would happen to me if he was gone." I stared at him, disbelief and anger warring inside me. "And what about me, Ethan? What about my future?" He shrugged. "You'll be okay. You always are." I felt the last bit of hope drain from me. I started to wonder if I'd ever trust my own family again. The isolation was suffocating. I tried to reach out to friends, but I couldn't find the words to explain what was happening. I was ashamed, humiliated, and utterly alone. That as the days passed, I realized that the family I thought I knew was gone. In its place was a group of strangers, each looking out for themselves, each willing to sacrifice me for their own comfort. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to turn to. All I knew was that I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. Something had to change, but I was terrified of what that might mean. And so, I waited. I waited for David to wake up, for Ethan to come to his senses, for some Yanyan to tell me that I still mattered. But the silence was deafening, and the pain only grew. I was alone, betrayed, and more lost than I had ever been in my life. The days that followed were some of the loneliest of my life. I moved through the hospital like a ghost, haunted by the faces of people I once called family. I watched as relatives whispered in corners, as Ethan avoided my gaze, as David slipped further away with each passing hour. The world I had built, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice, was crumbling, and I felt powerless to stop it. At night, when the hospital halls were quiet and the only sound was the steady beep of David's monitors, I sat by his side and let my thoughts wander. I replayed every moment of our marriage, every choice I had made for the sake of our family. I remembered the years I spent putting everyone else first, missing out on dreams, shelving my ambitions, pouring my love and energy into making a home. I thought about the times I forgave, the times I stayed silent, the times I swallowed my pride for the sake of peace. Now, I was being asked to swallow even more, to accept a future where I was an afterthought, a burden, a woman left behind. Was I ready to lose everything I'd built for my family? Was I willing to let go of my dignity, my self-respect, just to keep the fragile peace that remained? I looked at David, his face pale and drawn, and wondered if he would even recognize the woman I had become. I wondered if he would be proud of me for enduring, or ashamed of me for not fighting back. I wondered if Ethan would ever understand the pain he had caused, or if he would always see me as an obstacle to his own happiness. The questions circled in my mind, relentless and unforgiving. I felt trapped between two impossible choices: accept the humiliation and betrayal, or stand up for myself and risk losing what little family I had left. I knew that whatever I decided, there would be no going back. One evening, as I sat alone in the hospital chapel, I found myself praying for David's recovery, not for forgiveness, but for strength. I needed the courage to face whatever came next, to make a choice that honored not just my role as a wife and mother, but my worth as a person. I needed to remember who I was before the pain, before the betrayal, before I became invisible, I thought about my own mother, a woman who had taught me the value of self-respect, who had always said, "You teach people how to treat you." I realized that I had spent so many years teaching my family that my needs didn't matter, that I would always put them first, no matter the cost. Now, I had to teach them something new. I stood up, my resolve hardening. I would not let this be the end of my story. I would not let my grief and humiliation define me. I would confront Ethan, and if David woke up, I would confront him too. I would demand answers, demand respect, demand to be seen. Have you ever had to choose between your pride and your loved ones? It's a choice I wouldn't wish on anyone, but sometimes, the only way to save yourself is to risk losing everything else. That night, I wrote a letter to myself, promised that I would no longer accept less than I deserved. I would fight for my dignity, even if it meant standing alone. I would find my voice, even if it shook. I would remember that I was more than a wife, more than a mother. I was a woman worthy of love, respect, and kindness. As I folded the letter and tucked it into my purse, I felt a strange sense of peace. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if my family would ever be whole again, but I knew that I was done being silent. I was done being invisible. About the next morning, I woke up with a new sense of purpose. I dressed carefully, brushed my hair, and looked in the mirror until I saw not just the pain, but the strength in my own eyes. I was ready for the confrontation that would change everything. No matter what happened, I would not let them take my dignity. I would not let them erase me from my own life. I was ready to fight, not just for my place in the family, but for myself. The morning sun filtered through the hospital windows, casting long shadows across the floor. I felt the weight of my decision settle over me as I walked down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. I found Ethan in the family lounge, hunched over his phone, his face drawn and tired. For a moment, I hesitated, wondering if I was strong enough for what needed to be said. But then I remembered the promise I'd made to myself. I would not be silent anymore. I closed the door behind me, the soft click echoing in the quiet room. Ethan looked up, startled. "Mom." I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "We need to talk, Ethan. Now. No more avoiding me. No more hiding behind paperwork or excuses." He set his phone aside, his jaw tightening. "Okay. What do you want to say?" I sat across from him, the papers clutched in my hand. My voice trembled, but I forced myself to meet his eyes. "I stood by you both through everything. How could you do this to me now? How could you and your father make these decisions without me, as if I don't matter?" Ethan's eyes flickered with something, guilt, maybe, or just exhaustion. "Mom, it wasn't meant to hurt you." Dad was scared. He wanted to make sure I'd be okay if he didn't make it. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "And what about me, Ethan? Did either of you stop to think about what this would do to me? I've given my whole life to this family. I've sacrificed. I've forgiven. I've loved you both through everything. And now, when I need you most, you treat me like a problem to be solved." He looked away, his hands clenched in his lap. "It's not like that, Mom. Dad he thought you'd be fine. You're always fine. You always figure things out." My voice rose, anger and heartbreak mingling. "That's not fair. Just because I've been strong doesn't mean I don't feel pain. Doesn't mean I don't deserve respect. You both made me feel invisible, Ethan, like I was just an afterthought." He flinched, his own eyes filling with tears. "I'm sorry, Mom. I really am." But Dad was so scared. He kept saying he didn't want to leave me with nothing. He was worried about the house, the money, everything. He said you'd understand. I let out a bitter laugh. Understand? How could I understand being betrayed by the two people I love most in this world? How could I understand being handed these papers while your father is dying in the next room? The room was thick with emotion. I could feel the years of love and sacrifice, the weight of every unspoken word, pressing down on us. I wiped my tears, my voice softening. "Ethan, I know you're scared, I know losing your father is the hardest thing you'll ever face, but you can't protect yourself by destroying me. That's not how families work. He looked at me, his face crumpling. I didn't want to hurt you, Mom. I didn't know what else to do. Dad was so insistent. He said it was for the best. I reached across the table, taking his hand in mine. I wish you'd talk to me. I wish you'd trusted me enough to let me in, instead of shutting me out. We could have faced this together. He squeezed my hand, his grip desperate. I'm sorry, I really am. I just wanted to make him happy. I thought if I did what he asked, it would make things easier. I shook my head, my heart aching. Easier for who? Ethan, because it's made everything so much harder for me. The door creaked open, and Carol stepped in, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. Is everything okay in here? I wiped my face, forcing a smile. We're just talking, Carol, just trying to understand each other. She nodded, closing the door behind her. You two need to work this out. We're all hurting, but we can't turn on each other. Ethan nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. I know. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I looked at him, searching his face for the boy I'd raised, the son I'd loved with all my heart. I need you to promise me something, Ethan. No more secrets. No more decisions behind my back. If we're going to get through this, we have to do it together. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I promise, Mom, I promise. For a moment, we just sat there, holding hands, the pain and love between us too big for words. I felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. And then my son said something I'll never forget. He looked at me, his eyes red and raw. Mom, I was so scared of losing Dad that I forgot I could lose you too. I'm sorry. I don't want to lose you. I need you. Those words broke something open inside me. I pulled him into my arms, holding him as tightly as I could. We cried together, the years of hurt and fear and love pouring out in a flood. In that moment, I realized that forgiveness wouldn't be easy, and trust would take time to rebuild. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt seen, I felt heard, and I knew that, no matter what happened next, I had found my voice again. The confrontation wasn't the end of our pain, but it was the beginning of something new, a chance to heal, to rebuild, and to remember that, even in the darkest moments, love can still find a way. The hours after that confrontation felt like walking through a storm that had finally broken, but left everything in its path scattered and raw. I left the family lounge with Ethan's words echoing in my mind, my heart heavy with a strange mix of relief and devastation. I had finally spoken my truth, but the cost of honesty was still unknown. Back in the hospital room, the atmosphere had changed. Carol hovered nearby, her eyes full of concern, while other relatives kept their distance, whispering in corners. I could feel the tension in every glance, every hushed conversation. Some looked at me with sympathy, others with thinly veiled judgment. I knew the story was already spreading. Margaret finally lost her composure. Margaret made a scene. Margaret couldn't keep the family together. I sat by David's bedside, my hand resting on his, and tried to steady my breathing. He was still unconscious, his face pale and peaceful, as if untouched by the chaos swirling around him. I wondered if he would ever wake up, if he would ever know what had happened in his absence. Part of me hoped he would, so he could explain, so I could finally understand. Another part of me dreaded the thought, afraid of what more I might learn. Ethan came in quietly, his eyes red from crying. He sat across from me, silent, the weight of our conversation still hanging between us. I could see the conflict in his face, guilt, the fear, the love that was still there, even if it had been buried by confusion and pain. Other family members began to take sides. Carol brought me tea and squeezed my shoulder, whispering, "You did what you had to do. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for standing up for yourself." But my brother-in-law, Mark, was less forgiving. He cornered me in the hallway, his voice low and sharp. Was this really necessary? Margaret, David's dying, and you're stirring up trouble. Maybe it's time you let go, Mom. His words stung, but I refused to let them break me. I had spent too many years swallowing my pain for the sake of peace. Now, I was learning that sometimes peace comes at too high a price. The days blurred together, each one a test of my resolve. Some relatives reached out with quiet support, a kind word, a gentle touch, a knowing look that said, I see you. Others avoided me, their silence louder than any accusation. I felt like I was walking a tightrope, balancing between relief at having finally spoken up and devastation at the fallout that followed. At night, I lay awake in the hospital's uncomfortable chair, replaying everything in my mind. Had I just destroyed my family, or saved myself? Was I selfish for demanding respect, or was I finally doing what I should have done years ago? The questions circled endlessly, offering no easy answers. Ethan was distant, but not gone. He brought me coffee in the mornings, sat with me in silence, sometimes reaching for my hand but pulling away before our fingers could touch. I could see the struggle in his iced desire to make things right, the fear that it was already too late. One afternoon, as I sat alone in the hospital cafeteria, Carol joined me. She listened as I poured out my doubts and fears, her presence a balm to my wounded spirit. You did what you had to do, Margaret, she said gently. You can't carry everyone else's pain forever. Sometimes, you have to save yourself. Her words gave me comfort, but the ache in my chest remained. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to forgive them or myself. The wounds were too fresh, the betrayal too deep. The hospital became a world of its own, a place where time moved differently, where every day was a battle between hope and despair. I watched as my family fractured, as old wounds reopened and new ones formed. I wondered if we would ever heal, if we would ever find our way back to each other. But even in the midst of the chaos, I felt a small spark of something new, a sense of freedom, a glimmer of something. I had spoken my truth, and no one could take that away from me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was living for myself, not just for everyone else. As I sat by David's side, watching the rise and fall of his chest, I whispered a silent promise to myself. I would not let this pain define me. I would find a way to forgive, to heal, to move forward, even if it meant doing it alone. The storm had passed, but the rebuilding had only just begun. In the days that followed, I realized I couldn't carry the weight of my pain alone. The hospital walls felt like they were closing in, and the silence between family members was suffocating. I needed to breathe, to find a space where I could speak freely and not feel judged for my grief or my anger. I called my sister, Helen, one evening after another long, sleepless night. She answered on the first ring, her voice warm and steady. Margaret, I've been so worried about you. How are you holding up? The tears came before I could answer. I poured out everything: the betrayal, the confrontation, the guilt and the relief. Helen listened quietly, never interrupting, just letting me empty my heart. When I finally finished, she said softly, "You deserve respect, no matter what. You've given your whole life to this family. It's time you give something back to yourself." Her words settled over me like a blanket. I realized how long it had been since I'd heard someone say I deserved anything at all. For years, I'd measured my worth by how much I could give, how much I could endure. But now, I was beginning to see that my needs mattered too. Helen encouraged me to join a support group for spouses dealing with loss and family conflict. At first, I was hesitant. I didn't want to share my story with strangers, didn't want to admit how broken I felt, but something inside me knew I needed to try. The first meeting was harder than I expected. I sat in a circle of women, each carrying her own burdens, her own scars. As I listened to their stories of betrayal, of heartbreak, of finding the strength to move forward, I felt less alone. When it was my turn to speak, my voice shook. but I told the truth. I spoke about the will, about Ethan, about the pain of being left behind. To my surprise, the women didn't judge me. They nodded, some with tears in their eyes, others with gentle smiles. One woman, Linda, reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're stronger than you think," she said. "We all are. Sometimes it just takes the worst moments to show us what we're made of." I left that meeting feeling lighter, as if I'd set down a piece of the burden I'd been carrying. I started going every week, finding comfort in the shared stories and the quiet understanding that passed between us. I realized that healing wasn't about forgetting the pain or pretending it never happened. It was about learning to live with it, to let it shape me without letting it define me. I also began to reflect on my own journey. I thought about the mistakes I'd made, at times I'd stayed silent when I should have spoken up, times I'd put everyone else's needs before my own. But I also saw my strengths, my resilience, my capacity for love, my willingness to keep going even when everything felt hopeless. I started journaling, writing down my thoughts and feelings each night. At first, the pages were filled with anger and sadness, but slowly, hope began to creep in. I wrote about the small victorias, standing up for myself, reaching out for help, finding moments of peace in the chaos. Have you ever found strength in the most painful moments? I never thought I would. I always believed that pain was something to be endured, not something that could teach me anything. But now, I see that pain can be a teacher. It can show us who we are, what we value, and what we're capable of surviving. I began to set boundaries with my family. I told Ethan that I needed time and space to heal, that I couldn't pretend everything was okay. I stopped apologizing for my feelings, stopped shrinking myself to make others comfortable. It wasn't easy. Old habits die hard, but each time I spoke my truth, I felt a little stronger. Helen continued to check in, reminding me that I wasn't alone. The women in my support group became friends, lifelines in the storm. I found myself laughing again, even if just for a moment, and dreaming of a future where I could be happy on my own terms. I realized that empowerment wasn't about never feeling pain. It was about choosing to move forward anyway, about finding the courage to speak up, to ask for help, to believe that I was worthy of love and respect. As I sat by David's bedside one evening, the hospital quiet around me, I whispered a promise to myself. I would not let this pain define me. I would find a way to heal, to forgive, to move forward, and I would do it not just for my family, but for myself. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope, not because everything was fixed, but because I was finally learning to fix myself. Just as I began to find a fragile sense of balance, new complications threatened to pull me under again. Word of the will and the confrontation had spread beyond the hospital walls. I started receiving calls from distant relatives offering sympathy, others fishing for gossip, a few even questioning my version of events. The story was no longer just mine. It had become family lore, twisted and retold in ways that made me feel even more isolated. One afternoon, I overheard Ethan talking to my brother-in-law Mark in the hospital corridor. Their voices were low, but I caught enough to know that Ethan was trying to justify his actions. Dad was clear about what he wanted. He insisted, "Mom just doesn't understand. She's making this harder for everyone." The words stung. I wanted to burst in and defend myself, to remind them that I was still here, still part of this family, still deserving of respect. But I stayed hidden, my heart pounding, my resolve wavering. Was I really making things harder? Was I the problem now? That night, I sat alone in the hospital cafeteria, staring at my untouched cup of tea. The loneliness was sharper than ever. I thought about reaching out to Ethan, about trying one more time to bridge the gap between us. But the fear of more rejection, of hearing again that I was making things harder, kept me frozen in place. I replayed every conversation, every decision, every moment that had led us here. I wondered if I'd ever get my family back, or if the damage was too deep to repair. The support group and my sister's encouragement had given me strength, But in the quiet moments, doubt crept in. Was I strong enough to keep fighting for myself, even if it meant losing the people I loved most? Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I got a call that changed everything. It was late, well past visiting hours when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and for a moment, I hesitated, but something in my gut told me to answer. On the other end was a nurse from the hospital, her voice urgent but kind. "Mrs. Thompson, your husband is awake. He's asking for you." My heart leaped and twisted at the same time. Relief, fear, hope, and dread all tangled together. I rushed down the hallway, my mind racing with questions. Would David remember what had happened? Would he explain, apologize, or only deepen the wounds? Would this be the moment that finally brought us back together or tore us apart for good? As I hurried toward his room, I realized that no matter what happened next, I had to face it hidden. I couldn't hide from the truth, or from my own pain. I had to find the courage to keep moving forward, even if the path was uncertain. Would I ever get my family back? I didn't know, but I was about to find out. The days that followed David's brief awakening were a blur of hope and heartbreak. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes squeezing my hand, sometimes looking at me with a sadness I couldn't quite read. There were no long conversations, no easy answers, just the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on us both. When David finally passed, the hospital room was filled with family. The grief was overwhelming, but beneath it all, the tension from the will and the choices that had been made simmered just below the surface. I felt it in every glance, every whispered conversation, every awkward silence. The funeral was set for the following week, and as the day approached, I knew I couldn't let it pass without speaking my truth. The church was packed with friends, relatives, and neighbors. I sat in the front row, Ethan beside me, his face pale and drawn. I could feel the eyes of the entire family on us, waiting to see how we would act, what we would say. I had spent so long swallowing my pain, but now, as the service drew to a close, I felt a surge of clarity. This was my moment. I would not let my story end in silence. When the minister invited anyone who wished to speak to come forward, I stood up. My legs trembled, but my voice was steady as I walked to the front of the church. I looked out at the sea of faces, some sympathetic, some skeptical, all waiting. I took a deep breath. Thank you all for being here to honor David. He was a good man, a loving father, and for many years, my partner in everything. We built a life together, raised a son, and weathered storms I never thought we'd survive. I loved him deeply, and I know he loved me too. I paused, searching for Ethan's eyes. He looked away, but I pressed on. But love is complicated. It's not always easy, and sometimes it's not enough to keep us from hurting each other. In David's final days, choices were made that broke my heart. Papers were signed, decisions were taken out of my hands, and I was left feeling invisible in my own family. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I could see relatives shifting in their seats, some uncomfortable, others nodding in understanding. I want you all to know that I am not here to shame anyone, or to air our pain for the world to see, but I cannot pretend that everything was perfect. I cannot stand here and let my story be rewritten without my voice. I loved you both enough to forgive, but I'll never forget. I turned to Ethan, my voice soft but firm. Ethan, you are my son. I will always love you. But I need you to understand that love is not about control or secrecy. It's about trust, respect, and honesty. I hope that one day we can rebuild what was lost, but it will take time, and it will take truth. The silence in the church was absolute. I could feel the weight of my words settling over everyone, the truth finally spoken after so much pain and confusion. What happened next shocked everyone. Ethan stood up, his face streaked with tears. He walked to the front of the church and took the microphone from my hands. For a moment, he just stood there, looking at me, then out at the family. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. I was scared. I thought I was doing what Dad wanted, but I see now how much I hurt you, Mom. I see how much I hurt all of us. I can't take back what I did, but I want to try to make things right. I want to be the son you deserve." There were tears in the eyes of many in the congregation. Some relatives came forward, offering hugs, apologies, and words of support. Others simply sat in stunned silence, unsure how to process what had just unfolded. In that moment, I felt a strange sense of peace. The pain was still there, but it was no longer mine to carry alone. I had spoken my truth, and Ethan had finally heard me. The road ahead would not be easy. But for the first time since David fell ill, I felt hope that as the service ended and people began to file out, I was surrounded by friends and family, some offering comfort, others seeking forgiveness of their own. I realized that healing would take time, but it had begun. I had made my final stand, not just for my dignity, but for the love that still bound us together, even in the face of betrayal. And as I left the church, the sun breaking through the clouds, I knew that I had found my voice, and that was something no one could ever take from me. In the days and weeks after the funeral, the house felt impossibly quiet. The absence of David was everywhere, in the empty chair at the kitchen table, in the silence that settled over the evenings, in the way the light fell differently through the windows. But the heaviness that had pressed on my heart for so long was beginning to lift, replaced by something gentler. Something like acceptance. Ethan and I spoke more honestly than we had in years. Our conversations were sometimes awkward, sometimes painful, but always real. He apologized again, not just for the will, but for the distance that had grown between us. I could see the regret in his eyes, the longing to rebuild what we had lost. I told him that forgiveness would take time, but that I was willing to try. We agreed to move forward, not by pretending the past hadn't happened, but by learning from it. I also found myself redefining my place in the family. For so long, I had been the caretaker, the peacemaker, the one who held everything together. Now, I was learning to let go of that role, to allow others to step up, to trust that I didn't have to carry every burden alone. I started saying yes to things I wanted, and no to things that drained me. I spent more time with friends, joined a book club, and even took a weekend trip by myself, something I hadn't done in decades. Through it all, I realized I could love my family without losing myself. I could be there for Ethan, support him as he navigated his own grief and guilt, but I didn't have to sacrifice my own happiness or self-respect to do it. I could honor David's memory without letting his final decisions define my future. There were still hard days, moments when the pain of betrayal resurfaced, when I missed the way things used to be. But there were also moments of joy, of laughter, of hope. I found strength in the small victories, a heartfelt conversation, a quiet afternoon spent reading, a new friendship blossoming from the support group I'd joined. Looking back, I see now that the journey wasn't just about surviving loss or overcoming betrayal. It was about rediscovering who I was, apart from the roles I'd played for so long. It was about learning to trust myself, to speak my truth, and to believe that I was worthy of love and respect, not just from others, but from myself. How would you have handled this ending? Would you have fought for your place, or chosen to walk away? I know there's no right answer, only what feels true to your own heart. For me, finding closure meant embracing both the pain and the possibility of a new beginning. That as I move forward, I carry the lessons of this chapter with me. I am not defined by what was taken from me, but by what I choose to reclaim. And in that, I have found a peace I never thought possible. Months have passed since David's funeral, and life has slowly settled into a new rhythm. The pain of betrayal and loss hasn't disappeared, but it no longer defines my days. Instead, I find myself waking up with a sense of quiet strength, a feeling I never thought I'd have again. Ethan and I are still rebuilding our relationship, one honest conversation at a time. There are moments when the old wounds ache, but there are also moments of genuine connection and laughter. We're learning to trust each other again, to share our lives without secrets or resentment. I see now that healing is not a destination, but a journey, one that requires patience, forgiveness, and a willingness to grow. I've also discovered new parts of myself. I spend more time with friends, exploring hobbies I once set aside. I've joined a local art class, and the simple act of creating something beautiful with my own hands has brought me unexpected joy. I volunteer at the community center, offering support to others who are facing their own storms. In helping them, I've found a sense of purpose and belonging that I never expected. Sometimes, I look in the mirror and hardly recognize the woman staring back. She is older, yes, and marked by sorrow, but she is also stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. I'm proud of the woman I've become. I'm proud that I found the courage to speak my truth, to set boundaries, and to choose myself even when it was the hardest thing I've ever done. Looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. Every tear, every sleepless night, every difficult conversation led me to this place of peace and self-acceptance. I know now that I am not defined by the betrayals I endured, but by the strength I found to rise above them. Life will never be the same, but in many ways it is richer and more meaningful than before. I am living proof that even in the aftermath of heartbreak, it is possible to find hope, healing, and a new beginning. If you're watching this and feeling alone, know that you're stronger than you think. I know what it's like to sit in the quiet of your home, heart aching, wondering if you'll ever feel whole again. I know the pain of betrayal, the confusion of not knowing who to trust, and the fear that you might never find your way back to yourself. But I also know that healing is possible, even when it feels out of reach. One of the most important lessons I've learned is that your worth is not defined by how others treat you. For so long, I measured my value by how much I could give, how much I could endure, how well I could keep the peace. But true strength comes from honoring your own needs, setting boundaries, and believing that you deserve respect and kindness no matter what anyone else says or does. If you're facing a crossroads, torn between holding on and letting go, I hope you'll choose yourself. It's not selfish to protect your heart. It's not wrong to demand honesty and respect. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. I also learned that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. It doesn't mean forgetting the pain or excusing the betrayal. It means freeing yourself from the weight of anger and resentment, so you can move forward with an open heart. Forgiveness is a process, and it's okay if it takes time. Most of all, I want you to know that you are not alone. There are people who care, who will listen, who will stand by you as you find your way. Reach out to a friend, a family member, or even a support group. Don't be afraid to ask for help. You deserve to be seen, heard, and loved. Share your story in the comments. I read every one. Your words might be the encouragement someone else needs to keep going. Let's build a community where we lift each other up, where we remind each other that we are worthy of love, respect, and happiness. Thank you for letting me share my journey with you. I hope my story gives you hope, courage, and the reminder that even in the darkest moments, you have the power to choose yourself and begin again. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps me continue to share real-life stories that matter, stories of heartbreak, healing, and hope. Every like and share helps someone else find this video, and maybe, just maybe, gives them the strength they need to face their own challenges. I would love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment when you had to choose yourself, even when it was hard? What lessons did you learn along the way? Please share your story in the comments below. I read every one, and your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Let's support each other. Your voice matters. This channel is a safe space for anyone who needs encouragement, understanding, or just a reminder that they're not alone. If you know someone who might benefit from hearing this story, please send it their way. Sometimes, the smallest act of sharing can make the biggest difference in someone's life. Don't forget to subscribe for more real life Emotional stories about family, love, and personal transformation. Together, we can build a community of strength, compassion, and hope. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for being part of this journey with me. Take care of yourself and remember, you are worth it.